I'm okay actually, and you are right. It was an awfully long time, but a good time. The things that always remain are the team have to train, and irrespective of what we say about players' highs and lows, and so players always want to train and they always enjoy training, and coaches always enjoy setting up training and taking training sessions. The difficulty probably was determining the players that wanted to stay and fight to get this club back up into the Premier League.
The tragic truth about Chris Hughton is not what the headlines want you to believe. There is no ex-wife. There is no scandal hiding behind closed doors. What is actually there is something far more human, far more serious, and far more real than any clickbait story could ever deliver. And if you want to understand what actually happened to this man, you need to stay with us, because this story goes deep. And if you are enjoying deep dives like this one, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype, so more fans can find the real story. Let us be absolutely clear right from the start. Chris Hughton is not divorced. He has never been divorced. He has been married to his wife Cheryl since the very beginning of his professional playing career. She was there at the Tottenham Hotspur FA Cup final celebrations back in May 1981, and she has been beside him every single step of the way since. Together they have built a family of 4 children, daughters Carleen and Aisha, and sons Leons and Sian, and they now have 7 grandchildren between them. The headline promising a scandalous ex-wife reveal is a fabrication. It is a packaging trick designed to pull clicks from people who deserve the actual truth. And the actual truth, when you sit down and look at it properly, is far more sobering than any rumour. Because in the years when the football world had largely moved on from Chris Hughton, when his name was appearing less and less in the running for big jobs, the Hughton household was quietly fighting not 1 but 2 battles against cancer at the same time. 2 diagnoses, 2 sets of treatment, 1 family holding itself together without ever making a fuss about it in public. That is not a scandal. That is something else entirely. In 2024, Cheryl Hughton was diagnosed with breast cancer. The family held that news close. There was no press conference, no dramatic statement, just a family dealing with something enormous. And then, while Cheryl was still in treatment, Chris Hughton received his own diagnosis. In April 2025, it was confirmed that he had prostate cancer. This was not a sudden shock out of nowhere. A routine health check carried out by the League Managers Association back in 2017, while he was still managing Brighton, had first flagged slightly elevated levels of a marker in his blood that doctors use to monitor prostate health. That is called a PSA level, which stands for prostate-specific antigen. Think of it as a warning signal. His levels were elevated but not dangerous, so he was placed on long-term monitoring. Then in 2024, those levels spiked significantly. Further tests confirmed the cancer was there. On the 7th of May 2025, Hughton had surgery to remove his prostate gland. It is a serious operation with a serious recovery. The weeks that followed were physically and psychologically demanding. He has spoken openly about the toll it takes, not just on the body, but on your sense of who you are and what comes next. And then, in April 2026, the news came through that his PSA level had dropped to 0. He was entirely cancer-free. There is one more piece to this health picture that makes it heavier still. In 2023, Hughton lost his father, Willie Hughton. Willie had also suffered from prostate cancer, so when Chris received his own diagnosis, he was not just facing it as a medical event, he was facing it as a son who had watched his father go through the same disease, and who had only recently said goodbye to him. That kind of weight does not just sit on your shoulders, it gets inside you. This is the real story, not gossip, not a marriage falling apart. A family holding together under the kind of pressure that most people will never fully understand. Now here is where the story shifts. Because once you understand the personal side, you have to look at the professional side. And that picture is considerably more complicated. Because Chris Hughton, for all the genuine sympathy his private battles deserve, had a football career in management that ran into serious and recurring problems. And those problems were entirely of his own making. He started at Newcastle United, and for a period, he was genuinely impressive. The club had been relegated in 2009. The dressing room was in pieces. The finances were being squeezed by owner Mike Ashley. Hughton walked in, stabilised everything, and got them promoted as championship winners with 102 points. He then guided them to 11th place in the Premier League in their first season back, including a 5-1 hammering of local rivals Sunderland. That result alone made him a hero on Tyneside. But then, on the 6th of December 2010, while the club still sat 11th in the league, he was sacked. The official reason from the board was that they wanted someone with more managerial experience, which was an extraordinary thing to say about a man who had just won the championship title and was keeping a promoted club comfortably in mid-table. The real reason, as later analysis made clear, was about money. Hughton had been pushing back hard against ownership plans to sell homegrown striker Andy Carroll in the January transfer window. He wanted to keep the squad together. Ashley wanted to cash in. His replacement, Alan Pardew, had literally just been sacked by a third division club. But Pardew was willing to work within the ownership's financial framework in ways Hughton was not. That tells you everything about what actually happened at Newcastle. His loyalty from players was real. Shola Amiobi and Joey Barton both spoke up publicly about the injustice of his dismissal. Hughton had earned that. But loyalty from players and trust from ownership are two very different things, and that gap would follow him throughout his career. At Norwich City, the pattern continued. He came in after a successful spell at Birmingham City and took over from Paul Lambert in June 2012. In his first season, he guided the Canaries to 11th place in the Premier League, which by most accounts exceeded what the squad was capable of delivering. But the second season is where things unravelled. The football became cautious in a way that frustrated supporters. Results were inconsistent. And then in April 2014, despite Norwich sitting 5 points clear of the relegation zone with 5 matches still to play, the board sacked him. Interim replacement Neil Adams could not save them, and they went down anyway. Hughton later described that Norwich period as the hardest of his managerial career, and you can understand why. He was dismissed from a position of relative safety because the football looked uninspiring, even when the results were technically acceptable. The board panicked, and the team paid for it. But it is Brighton where the full picture of his tactical approach comes into sharpest focus, because Brighton is both his greatest achievement and his clearest limitation. He got them promoted to the Premier League for the first time in the club's history in 2017. That is a remarkable thing to do, and it should never be dismissed. He then kept them up in their first season back in the top flight. But the way he kept them up is worth examining closely, because the method had a ceiling built into it from day one. His system was built around a rigid, low defensive block. The shape was typically a 4-5-1 or a 4-4-1-1, depending on the game. The idea was simple. Stay compact, protect the space in front of your penalty area, make the team hard to score against, and take your chances when they came. And for a newly promoted side with limited resources, it worked. The problem was the side effects. Because his wingers were asked to track opposition fullbacks all the way back into their own defensive third, they were effectively functioning as extra defenders rather than attacking outlets. So when Brighton won the ball back, they had no width going forward. Players had to sprint 70 to 80 yards just to reach an isolated striker. The attacks ran out of steam before they even started. In midfield, his players were told to man-mark, which sounds disciplined until you face a team with smart movement. Clever opponents simply dragged Brighton's midfielders out of position, which opened up huge pockets of central space for their creative players to exploit. It was a system that worked when the opposition was average, and crumbled when the opposition was organised. The defining moment came in the 2018 to 2019 season. Brighton's chairman Tony Bloom spent £52 million bringing in new players specifically identified through analytics. These were young, energetic, data-backed signings. Hughton barely used them. He continued to rely on the older group he trusted, and the attack became completely one-dimensional. They had the second worst expected goals figure in the entire Premier League that season. Expected goals is a measurement of how many goals a team should be scoring based on the quality of the chances they create. Second worst in the league means they were creating almost nothing of real danger. They were basically relying on striker Glenn Murray and set-piece goals from centre-back Shane Duffy. That was it, no plan B, no adaptation. £52 million worth of new talent sitting on the bench. They conceded 6 more goals than the previous season and earned 4 fewer points. Hughton was sacked in May 2019 and replaced by Graham Potter, who had been hired specifically to drag Brighton into the modern era of possession-based, flexible football, which, to his considerable credit, he proceeded to do. But the most damning chapter came next. At Nottingham Forest in October 2020, he did manage to stabilise a club that was struggling, which again showed his ability to steady a ship in crisis. The trouble was what happened once the ship was stable. In the following season, Forest needed to push for promotion. Hughton could not make the leap. The football was painfully predictable. There was no connection between the midfield and the forwards. The team sat back and waited for opponents to make mistakes, rather than going out and creating their own. With only 1 point from 7 matches, including a 2-0 home defeat to Middlesbrough, he was sacked on the 16th of September 2021. And then Steve Cooper arrived. Same players, same squad, different approach. Cooper pushed them up the pitch, gave them attacking structure, and at the end of that same season, Nottingham Forest were promoted to the Premier League. The players Hughton had could do it all along. They just needed someone willing to ask them to. That is not a small thing to sit with. That is the clearest possible evidence that the problem was the system, not the squad. Ghana was almost identical. Hughton had taken on a technical advisor role for the Black Stars and then stepped up to head coach in February 2023. Ghana had talented attacking players. Everyone could see it. But under Hughton, those players were never set free. The setup was conservative. The identity was unclear, and when opponents pressed them or applied late pressure, Ghana buckled. At the Africa Cup of Nations in early 2024, they failed to win a single group game, conceding cheap goals in the dying minutes against Cape Verde and Mozambique. He was sacked in January 2024. The same story, told again in a different country. That pattern, Brighton to Forest to Ghana, is not bad luck. It is a philosophy that the game had outgrown. Now, it is important to say this part clearly, because Hughton has spoken about it throughout his career, and he is right about it, even if his football methods fell short. The system he has worked inside was never level to begin with. He made history as the first mixed-race footballer to represent the Republic of Ireland, earning 53 caps and playing at major tournaments, including the 1990 World Cup. He did that while enduring serious racial abuse at English grounds throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Terrace abuse, hostility at away stadiums, casual racism inside dressing rooms. He experienced all of it and kept going anyway. And when that generation of black players retired, the paths into management were largely blocked. Highly decorated players from that era, men like John Barnes, Cyril Regis, Viv Andersons, Les Ferdinand and Luther Blissett, were routinely passed over for coaching roles. In 2017, only 2 of the 92 managers across the English Football League were from a black or minority ethnic background. Black and minority ethnic players made up between 25 and 30% of the playing workforce, but coaching representation sat below 3%, and boardroom representation was below 1%. Hughton has called this an incredible imbalance, and he is right. He has argued strongly for a version of the Rooney Rule, which comes from American football and requires clubs to interview at least one qualified minority candidate for any vacant coaching or managerial position. His argument is not that anyone should be handed a job. His argument is that the hiring process has been so shaped by closed insider networks, where owners and directors tend to hire people who look like them and move in the same circles, that qualified minority candidates are not even getting through the door. He has completed advanced courses on boardroom governance to make himself more credible in those conversations. He has used his platform seriously and with precision. Here is the uncomfortable truth, though. The football world is right about the system being broken, but the football world also judged Hughton on what happened on the pitch. And on the pitch, his approach increasingly looked like a relic. The sport moved to high pressing, to attacking identity, to flexible formations and data-driven squad usage. His style stayed fixed, and that gap became impossible to ignore. At Forest, the proof was irrefutable. His same squad, under a coach willing to play differently, got promoted. That is not about resources or circumstances. That is about tactical approach. And for all the legitimate arguments Hughton makes about unfair systems and closed doors, football is ultimately a results business, and the results in those final chapters told a very clear story. And then came the health battles, the loss of his father, his wife's diagnosis, and then his own. And the man who had spent his career trying to control what he could control, building defensive structures, limiting risks, managing expectations, found himself facing something no tactical setup could protect against. He had the surgery, he did the recovery, and in April 2026, the news came through. cancer-free, PSA level at 0. Since then, he has partnered with Prostate Cancer UK and the League Managers Association to speak openly about his diagnosis. He is particularly focused on reaching black men who face a 1 in 4 lifetime risk of developing prostate cancer, double the rate seen in the general male population in the United Kingdom. His message is simple and direct. Get checked early, because he had no symptoms at all when his was first flagged. The only reason it was caught was a routine screening, and early detection changed everything for him. That message, delivered by a recognizable face from the world of sport, reaches people that a clinical leaflet never could. He is also still pushing for fairer hiring practices in football, still making the argument that the pitch and the boardroom need to reflect each other, and that a sport cannot claim progress while locking out whole communities from its leadership structures. This is who Chris Hughton actually is. Not a scandal headline, not a broken marriage. A man who won promotions, steadied clubs in crisis, faced genuine racism with quiet dignity, watched his father and his wife fight cancer, then fought it himself, and came out the other side ready to use whatever platform he has left to help others. He was not the most modern football manager. The game moved past his methods in ways that cost him jobs and cost him a lasting legacy on the touchline. But the man himself, the person behind all the tactical decisions and the results columns, is a good deal more interesting and a good deal more admirable than any thumbnail ever bothered to tell you. Like and subscribe for more stories like this one, and leave a comment below telling us what you think of the real Chris Hughton.